Welcome to this gorgeous September day. In the past unit, we've been talking about economic choices. We've talked about the reasons behind a choice, such as how people economize, or are they based off incentives. We talked about the production possibilities curve as well, how companies and governments can use that to decide whether they're going to choose between two different things. We showed the limitations of the production possibilities curve, but what that really showed us is that when you choose something, people choose not to do something, and that's really important. And then we moved into the factors of production. So we have ideas of that resources are limited. Now, the factors of production help us to see how we can make things, or how we can manage scarce resources as best possible. And remember, those factors of production are land, labor, technology, capital, and entrepreneurship. We could pretty much summarize that all scarce resources could somehow fit into one of those 5 categories. So we had these factors of production. We're trying to figure out, maybe as a country or as a group of people or as an individual, what we're going to produce. And there's 3 basic economic questions, and this is what we're going to cover today, that one has to ask themselves when they are going to produce something. They have to first say, the first question they're going to ask themselves is, what are we going to produce? Well, that's a big question. I would love to produce something that's going to bring me a lot of money and help me to, I guess, manage my resources a little bit better. But I don't always have the resources to do that. I would, well, I'm going to give you this example. This is my swim trunks, made by Rip Curl, and I really just swim in these. I don't really surf in them or anything. They're made of polyester, and so I could decide, hey, I want to make swim trunks, but Mr. Giuliano's not a really good sewer, and so that would be pretty hard. So when we ask ourselves, what are we going to produce, we have to realize what resources do we have. It's also important to note that you have to think about, what are people going to buy when you're deciding what are we going to produce. Are we going to produce cakes that there's not really a big market for, like rum raisin cakes or the allergy-free cakes? You know, there's a certain niche for those markets, of course, but if you're trying to maximize your resources, are you going to make something so specific? The next question you have to ask ourselves is, how are we going to produce it? And this somewhat involves technology and labor, again, managing those factors of production. So how are we going to make these swim trunks? Am I going to sew them by hand, or am I going to use a sewing machine? And that's where inventions come in. You might think to make an invention because that can help people make things quicker. Doing things efficiently, however, is not always the best way. You may think we're going to make things as efficiently as possible with technology. Well, let me ask you this. Is it okay then to ship jobs overseas? In other words, you know, I'll be honest, this camera I'm recording this video on was made overseas. These trunks here were, let's see, made in China. Big surprise. Is it okay to do that? This is an Australian company, but is it okay for an Australian company to make trunks overseas? You have to ask yourself. It's certainly more efficient. You know, we hear there a lot of talk about people saying, oh, they ship jobs overseas. Well, there's a reason. It's because it's a lot cheaper to do that, and therefore they can manage your resources. Does that mean you're taking jobs away from other people who would gladly have it? Or take the case of organic produce, for example. Organic food's much harder to grow and maintain. There's much more standards on it than conventional food. Why do people do that? Well, it's because sometimes the most efficient way isn't always the best way. Sometimes hard work does matter. So that's the other thing someone has to take into consideration when they're going to produce it. Are they going to produce it as cheaply as possible, or are they going to produce it as best as possible and put a lot of money into it? Again, that's how we will produce something. The third question someone has to ask themselves, and that's the final part, is for whom will it be produced? For example, are we going to make these trunks for just surfers like me, because there's only about 3 million of us in the world, or are you going to make them for everyone, because there's a lot more people who like to go in the ocean and go swimming than everyone else? So, however, again, remember, whenever you choose to do something, you're choosing not to do something. When you make a product for everyone, sometimes you have to compromise what you put in that product, because you're trying to make it available for everyone. There's a restaurant around Westchester. It's called Iron Hill Brewery, and it is a brew pub. Not that I'm trying to talk about beer, but I'm going to talk about the restaurant. And my feeling with that restaurant, maybe you know it, is that they try to cater to everyone, and therefore you cater to no one. So again, these are 3 questions. We'll go over them again. What are we going to produce? How are we going to produce it? And for whom are we going to produce it? Are 3 questions that every person or every business or every country, no matter what you ask, must ask themselves if they're going to ask, how are we going to manage our resources as best as possible? Because the answers to these questions will very well help someone to gain more resources. Remember, scarcity means that there's too many wants and too many needs. But scarcity is best managed when you have as much as your wants and needs managed or met. So if you can't answer these questions properly without thinking through them, then you're not going to manage your resources as best. So companies need to ask themselves this. You need to ask yourself this. And that wraps up today's lesson. So, for today's assignment, I want you to take just a product in your house, like I did with my trunks here, and maybe it's something you use. Could be your cell phone, or it could be a piece of clothing, and take each question that we've posed today, and I'll write them down, and answer the question for that product. So for my shorts, for example, why did Rip Curl decide to make swimming trunks? Again, deciding what will he produce? Well, Rip Curl started as a surfing company, and they wanted to make trunks that people could move about freely in. There was a passion from there, is that they said, hey, we want to be comfortable in what we do, and other people want to do the same thing. Second question, how it's going to be produced? Well, we're going to use sewing machines and go to China because it's quicker and we can make trunks cheaper, and we're going to use polyester, a little bit of cotton, because these fabrics breathe, not polyester, but certain cotton breathes easier. And for whom it's going to be produced? As much as I'd love to say that this short particular was made just for surfers, it really wasn't. It was made for everyone. I do have trunks that were specifically designed for people who are in the ocean, but these aren't a couple of them. So follow those 3 questions and just take a product like that and answer those 3 questions about it. Have a great day.